Hi guys, welcome back to Minko's bedroom. I know it's been a while, it's been 2 days that I didn't post a video. Uh, there were some technical difficulties, unfortunately. The first day I did post a video, but there was a copyright claim, so I couldn't post that day. And then the second day I posted, it was a 30-minute video on why, on basically understanding the Afghanistan problem. How did the Taliban win the war, basically. It was a 35-minute video, and I recorded half of it. But then, unfortunately, there was an issue with microphones, and it was a whole thing, and the whole thing was scrapped, unfortunately. So that's why there was a 2-day uh, sort of holiday for me, I guess. And But we'll start right away with videos every day. This is why Afghanistan is impossible to conquer. Uh, Now, tell me in the comments if you want more videos on Afghanistan. It's a subject that is really in the news right now, and it's very interesting to me personally. And I would like to do a lot more geopolitical videos, maybe news videos in the future. Where I explain, what's happening in the world. That's interesting to me. Anywho, I'm gonna stop talking and we're gonna watch this video, which is why Afghanistan is impossible to conquer.
This video is made possible by CuriosityStream and Nebula. Watch another. The US is withdrawing and the Taliban appears to be stronger than ever, with control of up to 85% of the country. In 1979, the Soviet Union also invaded Afghanistan, and after 9 years, they also withdrew and the regime they fought so hard to prop up almost immediately collapsed. And before them, the British Empire invaded Afghanistan on 3 separate occasions and failed to conquer them in each instance. Today, Afghanistan has a smaller population than California in a territory that's only a little larger than France. So how
I
is
didn't
it
know
that a
that.
country of this small size was capable of resisting 3 of the world's most powerful military juggernauts from history? There's a lot of answers to that question, but let's start with the easiest to understand and perhaps the most obvious: geography.
Yeah,
In
of course.
reality, Afghanistan is little more than a geographical expression. All of her borders were arbitrarily drawn up by outside foreign powers more than a century ago. Its small population is composed of a loose association of 14 different ethno-linguistic groups and numerous more tribes, many of which, like the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, straddle the country's borders. Artificial boundaries set up by Westerners hundreds of years ago that mean very little to them. The Pashtuns make up nearly half of Afghanistan's population today, but 2/3 of all Pashtuns live next door in neighboring Pakistan and are a minority group there. The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan runs directly through the Pashtun tribal area and divides the 60 million Pashtun people between both countries. This boundary was artificially decided by the British Empire back in 1893, and to date, not a single government based in Afghanistan has ever officially ratified it. Imagine if in Europe, Poland was divided between Germany and Russia, and a wall was built directly between both sides of where the Poles live. Obviously,
What's that kind of example? Imagine if Poland is divided into. Why don't you just say the same thing with Germany, which it happened? He was so close as well. You know, like was he trying to be? You know, imagine if Poland is divided in two. Imagine if Germany is divided in two. You know, I don't know. I don't know what's his point. I'm sorry I stopped the video, but it's weird, right? Like, why would you say? Imagine if Poland, because he's trying to say that culturally, the Pashtuns of Afghanistan and Pakistan are the same people and they should be their own country. Imagine if it's divided between two countries. I get that, but Germany, right next door, by the way, was divided in two for 50 years, give or take, and we don't have to imagine it.
the Poles would never recognize this border and routinely cross it to visit family and friends. And the Pashtuns largely treat the Afghan-Pakistan border
Never mind.
the very same way. The border here is extremely mountainous and rural, so patrolling it from the Pakistani government's perspective has always been quite challenging. This has allowed Pashtun insurgents operating within Afghanistan the valuable ability to easily escape across the border into the friendly Pashtun areas of Pakistan, regroup and recover, recruit more men, and then travel back into Afghanistan freshly supplied and ready for more combat. Neither the Afghan border nor the Taliban recognize this border as legitimate, and there are at least 235 known crossing points across the border and through the mountains between both countries. Militants, drugs, money, and supplies can easily be smuggled into Afghanistan by way of Pakistan, and it's made all the easier by many of the Pashtuns of Pakistan being more sympathetic to the Afghan or Taliban cause. This has led many people to label the Afghan-Pakistan border as the most dangerous border in the entire world. And recently, as a result of all of this, by the end of June 2021, Pakistan has finally finished building a fence across the entire length of the border, specifically to stop all of this, and has restricted border crossings to only 16 legally designated locations. But this is all only the start of what makes Afghanistan an almost
Well, that side doesn't matter anymore.
impossible place to conquer. I mean, just look at the map. Afghanistan is landlocked, so getting your troops and supplies there requires the cooperation of at least one of the 6 countries that borders it: Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and of course Pakistan. But even once you get across one of these countries and you arrive at Afghanistan's borders, you're going to be met with Afghanistan's monumentally challenging terrain. Despite being in the center of the world's most populous continent, Afghanistan has always been heavily isolated and largely rural and underpopulated because of this. The high
That's why terrain plays a huge role in war. Even back in the day, especially back in the day. But nowadays, the Americans lost the war. 20 years later, they're out. That's why if there's ever a war between America and Iran, it won't be Iran won't fall as easily as Iraq did because of the terrain. Iraq is basically just a plain. There's hi, hi, uh, hallways. I was gonna say, Jesus Christ. Highways. Jesus Christ, that drive direct to the capital. Whereas in Iran, it's a little bit more challenging with mountains. It's a very mountainous region, and that's one of the reasons why Afghanistan is in Taliban's hands right now. To be honest.
peaks of the Hindu Kush mountain range with some of the tallest and biggest mountains found anywhere on the planet. 75% of Afghanistan's territory is considered to be mountainous, and nearly half of our territory has an elevation above 2,000 meters, which makes Afghanistan among the most mountainous countries of the world, and among the most isolated too as a result. These huge mountains act like natural walls in more ways than one. They help to keep invaders out, but they also separate communities within and make transporting supplies across challenging. These are all very difficult factors to overcome from the perspective of any outside invader. There are dozens of valleys that zigzag in between the mountains of Afghanistan where most of the population resides. And since they're surrounded by some of the biggest and most formidable mountains on Earth, it's always been difficult to travel between them, and consequently, they're each sort of their own little world inside of Afghanistan. Over thousands of years, they each ended up developing their own rather distinctive cultures, identities, beliefs, tribes, and rulers, and thus, there's very little sense of Afghan nationhood, and Afghan patriotism has never been a particularly strong motivating factor. Because
basically they're more loyal to their tribes and their clans than Afghanistan as a nation. There's not much nationalism going on in Afghanistan. It's more, you know, loyalty to your tribesmen, basically. That's why it's very difficult for the Afghani army. Uh, the previous government that just fell actually quite recently, the democratic government, for them to defend against the Taliban was difficult mentally because there was a lot of corruption. So they stopped paying their wages to the soldiers, which is insane. Like, how many times in history does it have to happen that you stop paying your army and then the army turns against you? It's just logical. They stopped having logistical supremacy, so to speak, because the U.S. withdrew its logistics, and so they couldn't supply their troops with ammo and gas and all very those needed supplies for the war, and so they basically, I mean, it was very, and then of course there's no nationalism, so they don't particularly fight. There's not this honor bound fight. We're fighting for Afghanistan. No, they're more loyal to their tribesmen than to the whole country because they've never, been to this country. As he said, the country is extremely divided between the different parts because there's no, routes to go from one place to the next easily.
Because of all these separate and rural communities that are difficult to travel between, the grip of any central government has always been weak and intermittent, while the valleys have largely governed themselves autonomously, especially in the countryside. Any semblance of Afghan national unity has always been a direct consequence of foreign powers invading and attempting to impose their rule over the whole, like with the British, Soviets, and recently Americans. Historically, and up to the present day to an extent, Afghanistan continues to operate in a way that's more similar to the Holy Roman Empire than the European Union.
All right,
The ruler and
that's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. So basically, a plethora of city-states fighting each other. They're unified, but they're not really unified, so to speak. It's a decentralized government, or at least I should say, it's a decentralized amount. It's a decentralized country. There are states who have more autonomy, who have autonomy of their over their own region than you know than the government has. I know I'm not explaining it very well, but I'm trying to. I don't. I'm learning new information from what he's saying, but I'm trying to sort of, uh, you know, compare it to how it was when the Holy Roman Empire was in power
the
200
capital
years ago.
city, Kabul, may nominally wield de jure authority over the entire realm, like the Holy Roman Emperor, but is not able to wield de facto authority over all of the various princes, valleys, tribes, and clans, just like the Holy Roman Emperor. Any
Okay.
invader coming in to occupy Afghanistan will struggle with all of the same issues that a domestic ruler will. Afghanistan's geography is not very conducive to a centralized authority, and neither is Afghanistan's infrastructure. Enforcing your authority across the various Afghan valleys means that you must move your troops and supplies from one to another through the various mountain passes that are often narrow and incredibly easy positions to set up an ambush in as a defender. These passes basically act like natural choke points for the movement of people all across Afghanistan, and up until the 1960s, there were hardly even any roads to speak of that went through them. Control over just a few of these mountain passes can ensure control over an entire valley, and sabotaging one can block the flow of supplies and troops for days, weeks, or even longer depending upon the severity of the damage. When the Soviets invaded the country, the Mujahideen defenders would ambush Soviet convoys as they traveled through these passes, and then immediately flee back and vanish into the caves of the mountains when they were fired back upon. They would set up roadblocks at river crossings or in other passes, and in some instances were successful enough to block entire roads for months or even years. The town of Khost near the Pakistan border was permanently sealed off from the rest of the country for the entire war by the Mujahideen, sabotaging a series of strategic roads, and the government forces blocked inside could only be supplied by air. And when the Americans invaded, these passes were just as vital. Most significant for them was the Khyber Pass here, the easiest and most direct path through the Hindu Kush between the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. This path has been used for thousands.
That's a nightmare for the number of ambushes that you can do on because there's only one road, so you know when they're coming from, and you know the terrain, dude. Imagine the nightmare trying to conquer that country. You have to go through all the mountains, all the caves that you don't know about. You're gonna lose.
thousands of years by conquerors, traders, and missionaries all alike, and is without a doubt one of the most strategic locations to hold on the entire planet. At one point, nearly 80% of all NATO and US supplies that were being brought into Afghanistan by road were all coming through the Khyber Pass via Pakistan, which is kind of ironic because most of the Taliban's equipment were also coming from across the border in Pakistan, just at different and more rural crossing points. The Taliban
Wow.
knew how critically important the Khyber Pass was to the American war effort, so it was a frequent target of sabotage efforts. In 2009, the Taliban blew up a bridge here that temporarily shut down the entire pass, and America was forced to broaden their supply lines into Afghanistan through the three Central Asian bordering countries as well. In the years before all of this war, the Afghan government had attempted to build a circular highway that would connect all of their major economic centers together. But over the decades of civil war and Soviet intervention, the highway was in very bad shape. By the time the United States invaded in
Phew.
2001, there were only a mere 50 kilometers of paved roads to speak of in the entire country that's bigger than France. For comparison,
Jesus Christ.
France has 1.1 million kilometers of paved roads.
France has 1.1 million kilometers, and Afghanistan has 50. I don't know what's gonna happen with that country, to be honest. Especially now that it's fallen in Taliban's hands, because they've been the Taliban for 20 years now, and it's one thing fighting a guerrilla, you know, war. It's another completely other thing when it's you have now it's your time to rule. It's completely different. Fighting a guerrilla style warfare, and then you become the ruler. I don't know how they're gonna manage it. Are they gonna be diplomatically? Are they gonna be diplomatic? Are they gonna act the same as before they conquered the country while they were still fighting a war, or are they going to change their mentality, sort of trying to incorporate Afghanistan in the world? I mean, the world's economy, I was going to say, but I don't know how that's going to happen. By selling opium, maybe? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in this country, and the people who are fleeing, trying to flee. And then, the question is, all those people, if they decide to flee, where are they going to go? Are they going to go to Turkey, and then potentially is there going to be another refugee crisis in Europe? And then this time, because unlike last time, this time I don't think most European governments would be willing to enter to allow to all those refugees to enter their countries. Because last time, especially in Germany, there was a huge backlash against the Merkel government uh, because of the refugees. Because she allowed, I don't want to say millions because I don't know particularly the numbers. She allowed hundreds of thousands of them uh, to enter the country, and then the country, a large population of the country turned against her. Normally, uh, everybody, I don't want to say everybody, generalize here. I don't know that much about German politics, but mostly everybody, from what I've heard, they were with her in terms of her decisions. And the first time she was ever really pushed back on was the refugee crisis. I wonder if that's going to happen.
Roads in a smaller and significantly less mountainous territory. The lack of good roads only made the disparate valleys and communities of the Afghan interior even more isolated from each other, and it made transporting troops and supplies a logistical nightmare for the Americans and the Soviets before them, none of which helped at all for the country's stability. As with all things in Afghanistan, the development of new roads is difficult and expensive because of the harsh mountainous terrain, the cold winter weather that often chews roads up, and sabotage from the Taliban and other insurgents. Building or repairing roads in the country necessitates hiring security and necessitates building them across harsh geography and climates, which means that it can get incredibly expensive, as much as $5 million per mile in some locations. And this is all in a country where the average person
Dude,
only makes a little over $500 a year, one of the poorest and least
500 bucks a year. I was gonna say if he was gonna say a month, I was gonna be like, okay, you know that's bad, but a year, that's like 50 bucks a month. That's why there was so much corruption in Afghanistan. You know how they said, if you've been listening to the news, but lately, they said that the president or the former president now left the country with like $169 million in bags on a helicopter. It's because of this. Those people who are in power, the commanders, who there was so much corruption in the army, in the democratic Afghanistan. The corruption was insane, and it's because of that. Because one day you're making $50 a month, and out of nowhere you start making 20,000 a month from corruption, from skimming a little. Yeah.
Least developed nations on the planet. The construction of a single mile of road within Afghanistan is about the combined annual wages of 9,800 Afghanis. So, obviously, the funding for all of these projects has to come from abroad. Ultimately, Afghanistan is easy to invade and take over, but it's almost impossible to effectively hold it for long. The landscape is huge, with a lot of rural and empty places for insurgents and rebels to hide. Getting troops in and establishing supply lines through massive mountains and narrow passes is challenging and easy for guerrilla combatants to harass and disrupt. The relationship with neighboring Pakistan is complex, and Pashtun insurgents can easily cross the border and regroup without much fear, and then return to fight in Afghanistan whenever ready. The flow of insurgent supplies, money, and manpower across the border is difficult to
This video was filmed on July 31st. That's what I was trying to see if this was before the government fell.
stop through the hundreds of high and remote mountain passes, and requires the cooperation of Pakistan, which she is sometimes willing to give and other times not. Centralized rule is almost impossible to enforce outside of Kabul by way of Afghanistan's geographic reality, and nation building is inherently impossible because even the concept of an Afghan nation among Afghanistan's various ethnicities and tribes is tenuous at best, and certainly radically different from the Western idea of nation-states such as Germany or France. The colonial-era borders of Afghanistan dictated by the British over a century ago are probably the biggest core reason for Afghanistan's instability, but Afghanistan has been particularly unstable even by former British colonial meddling standards. For the past 43 years, Afghanistan has been embroiled in constant warfare, and it's an incredibly complex story to tell. From a communist revolution that enforced state atheism in one of the most conservative and religious countries on the planet, to an invasion and occupation by the Soviet Union, 3 subsequent civil wars, and then the invasion of the Americans and NATO, and the United States occupation that's all set to finally end after nearly 20 years in about a month from now. It is one of the most fascinating, violent, and controversial conflicts of both the 20th and 21st centuries, and unfortunately, not acceptable for me to cover on YouTube due to their terms of service. I know how making videos on YouTube works, and I know that this video already has a super high chance of being demonetized and unpromoted by YouTube's algorithm because of what I'm discussing. But the moment that
What is he discussing? That's weird. So the video won't be promoted through YouTube because why? I don't understand. That's weird because it's not like he's talking about the Nazi regime, even though that's controversial history or whatever. He's talking about something that's happening right now. I don't know. I don't know. That's weird. I don't know.
that I really start diving into the whole history of the Afghan conflicts, why they began, how they were fought, and how it all led to where we are today, it's a guarantee that this video will be censored and you won't get to see it. So instead, I created another full-length companion video to this one with all of that controversial but fascinating information included, and uploaded that version to Nebula, which, as you've probably heard by now, is home to tons of exclusive, ad-free content like my entire Modern Conflict series, with additional full-length videos you can go watch right now detailing the Israel-Palestine conflicts, the 2020 Armenia-Azerbaijan war, and the ongoing Russo-
Okay, so this is what's going on. This was the end of the video. The rest is just basically an advertisement for Nebula, so go check it out. This channel it was a pretty good video. Real life war was a pretty good video. I liked it. But to be honest, it lacked a little bit. There could have been a little bit more information. What we learned is basically there was this one passage where it's vital when it comes to supplies, and that the region, the Afghanistan was a very decentralized state, and that it operated very much alike, or very much like the Holy Roman Empire. Actually, that's pretty interesting. Actually, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned why this country is so difficult to conquer, and why I don't know what's going to happen. To be honest, nowadays with the Taliban taking over, will they have another civil war? Because there was, the incident when someone blew up a bomb in the airport. So that was like another terrorist group fighting against the Taliban. It's a very complicated mess. I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest. And so, anywho, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.